FM News Talk 97.1. Max on Movies Podcast.
FM News Talk 97.1. Thanks so much for joining us for the second hour of Max on Movies. I've got an interview with local filmmaker Wyatt Weed, who made Shadowland and Color Eulogy. It's coming up this hour, along with my review of Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Bell in The Boss. Also, now on Blu-ray and DVD and digital streaming is, of course, Star Wars The Force Awakens. There are some people out there who are upset it's not on VHS. I'm not making that up. FM News Talk 97.1. Thanks again for tuning in to Max on Movies. As you know, we love highlighting local filmmakers here on the Max on Movies show, and we have none other than Wyatt Weed on the show right now. You know the name. You've seen his films. Wyatt, thanks so much for coming on Max on Movies today.
Oh, thank you, Max. Glad to be on.
Now, I met you randomly at one of the Toy Man shows that they have bi-monthly, and you were there. You had a booth. You were pimping out Color Eulogy, of course, and I kept seeing the flyers, and I was like, oh, Color Eulogy. Yeah, I've heard of this, of course, and I've always run into you with comic books around, because when I first became aware of Shadowlands, it was the DVDs that were sold at Comics HQ, Steve's old shop. And so you've always sort of swum in the comic book circles. What makes you sort of go towards the geek?
I'm a big geek myself. I'm a diehard geek. One of my earliest memories in life is watching Star Trek, the original series, on television back in the 60s. I can still remember that. And the drive-ins, and then just, I was a comic book kid, but the serious collecting probably didn't start till later, but when I was a kid, you walked into the corner shop and there was Superman and Batman and, Captain Marvel and all that stuff on the racks there. So I just I was never like a Marvel guy or a DC guy. I was an everything guy, and and then that took me into Famous Monsters, and then it took me into Starlog and Cinefantastique, and I've been a big geek all along.
Yeah, for people who don't know the names that you just said, that's what I grew up on too. And in the days before the internet, Cinefantastique and Starlog, Famous Monsters, even Fangoria. I mean, these were the magazines where we learned about any kind of behind-the-scenes stuff, behind-the-scenes photographs. Production on Willow Part 2 has started, not so much. So it was just like the internet, where they could be wrong about stuff too.
Well, it was amazing, too, because, Cinefantastique, you could read like a 20-page article about, they do these retrospectives on old films. You could read a 20-page article on War of the Worlds or, The Day the Earth Stood Still. And nowadays, you're lucky if you can get a couple of paragraphs, like a blurb on a website, or they take you to the video. Back then, you actually had to sit down and read, and there was like several hours worth of material to read. That's unheard of now.
So being this young geek, of course, it led you into an appreciation for film. What made you get hardcore into film?
1977, Star Wars in the summer, and then 6 months later, Close Encounters comes out close to Christmas. And it was just like a 1-2 punch. I was just, boom. I was like, I had to do that. And by, the following spring, I had gotten a Super 8mm camera, and I was shooting film. And that's pretty much all I've been doing since about 1978 is shooting film, cable television, movies, working out in L.A., just kind of stepping up one step at a time as the opportunities presented themselves.
Now, what was it about the vampire film that made you think you could tackle that? It's a really tough genre. There's obviously lots of different ways you can go with vampire films, but I thought, okay, this is an interesting gambit.
Well, with Shadowland, it's not to say that I didn't want to do a vampire film, but it was weird how I kind of stepped backwards into it, because I was just sort of going down these pathways and exploring these different stories. And I had a simple idea about a woman crawling out of a hole in the ground, like a beautiful woman crawling out of a hole in the ground. And then what the heck happened? Why'd she come out of the ground? Is she a demon? Is she an angel? Is she a ghost? Is she, what the heck is she? And it really started with the visual of the woman coming out of the ground. Then I started trying to fill in the dots, and I kept coming back to vampire. I thought, gosh, if this woman got buried in the ground hundreds of years ago, what else could survive in the ground for that length of time and then get uncovered and come out and sort of regain her strength? And I just kept kind of coming back to vampire, and it was actually sort of a natural evolution. And I've always loved vampire genres, but I go towards the classic. I go towards the old Hammer horror films, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing. But in modern day, I think Interview with the Vampire is probably one of the finest vampire films ever made. It's a very different kind of film, but so I'm a big fan of of vampire films in general. But I'm not like, I haven't read like every Anita Blake novel. I haven't, I'm not, I don't get in fights with people when they say, Gary Oldman's the best Dracula. I'm just like, okay, cool. Yeah, that's cool.
People don't give Neil Jordan's films enough credit these days. I don't know why. It's almost this forgotten masterpiece. I don't know if it's because it has such popular leads, because it's got Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, but that's a phenomenal film.
It's an amazing film. It treats the genre with a lot of respect, and the production value is astonishing.
Yes.
But I remember at the time what a ruckus it caused that Tom Cruise was in it. And I know that Anne Rice, at first she was really upset, and then she saw the movie and she kind of backpedaled and sort of supported it. But, yeah, you put two, pretty boy, hot young superstars in it, and that sort of glosses over a lot of it. But it's an amazing film. So anybody who hasn't checked it out, I think they should really check it out. Another film a couple years later that I loved was Blade.
Yeah.
And Blade was an early Marvel
Absolutely,
property.
yeah.
Like before Marvel really took off and became modern-day Marvel. But, yeah, that was an early big hit for Marvel. And another fine vampire film, very, very different from Interview, but still a really, really good film.
Yeah, anytime people talk about the current age of superhero films, they try to put the start either on Sony's Spider-Man in 2002 or even back to Fox's X-Men in the year 2000. But I would say it would be Blade. It's even a few years before that, about 1998, when Blade came out, where people said, wow, you could treat a comic book property seriously. And that's a fantastic film. The opening scene is still just a landmark opening scene.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, the real modern era, I would agree with you. I think it starts with Blade, and it just kind of continues from there.
So your latest film is Color Eulogy. The reason why we're having you on to talk on the Maxim Movie Show about Color Eulogy is something very exciting. You have a week-long engagement starting soon.
Yes, we were lucky enough to get this feature film picked up by Wehrenberg Theaters, and they're doing a big red carpet premiere on April 8th at Ronnie's 20 in the South City there. And it's playing for a week. It'll be playing the 8th through the 14th. If many of you come out and buy tickets, maybe they'll hold it over a week, but it's going to be there for a week. So, you get those people walking up to you and going, oh, when can I see your movie? I don't want to hear anybody coming up to me after April 14th going, oh, how can I see your movie? It's playing in the theater the 8th through the 14th. Get out there and see it. But we're really, really appreciative of Wehrenberg. Wehrenberg's been supportive of a lot of local filmmakers, and they've been working with us to get this thing into the theater and do the red carpet premiere. And completely locally shot, great local locations, all local theater actors who make up the cast. And just kind of we took our Los Angeles, Hollywood experiences that we had making films out there and brought that back to the Midwest and, tried to apply that here just with a smaller budget and using what we had locally. And I'm really, really proud of the results. I know every filmmaker says that, but I'm really, really happy with how this film came out. It sounds crazy, but it exceeded my expectations when we started it. We caught lightning in a bottle, and I think the cast and crew just really came together and gelled on this film.
And so, of course, people are going to be flocking to the theater, of course, to support local film. But other than that, tell them about the plot. Tell them why people should be excited to see Color Eulogy.
We've been talking about comic books and geek stuff. Well, it's kind of a realistic film about geeks. What happens is there's a young man, Chris, and he didn't have a happy home life in St. Louis. And years ago, he left to go to the West Coast and make a life for himself and start his own thing with his girlfriend, Anne. Well, he gets the phone call from his best friend, Brian, who's still back in St. Louis, and he tells him, man, your mom's sick. She's really seriously ill. She could be dying. So Chris reluctantly packs up and comes back to St. Louis, and it starts all the old stuff again. Why didn't I know who my dad was? Who was my dad? Why won't my mom talk about all this stuff? But on the other hand, he's always wanted to be a comic book artist, and he finds out that the old guy who was his friend that lived down the street his whole childhood, he discovers that this guy was a comic book artist and who kind of almost succeeded but then sort of put it away to have a regular life. So he and his friends join forces and get together with this older guy, and they decide to relaunch this comic book. So in the midst of all this family strife that's going on, these guys are sort of striking out and, trying to make their dream come true. So I was talking to somebody about it the other day. It's like a serious subject with very funny people. So it's very much a comedy drama, geek references, comic book stuff, and a little family, a little family drama and a little family comedy thrown in on top. There's no transforming robots. There's no superheroes clashing. Batman and Superman are not going at it. We don't have 500 or 5,000 CGI shots.
Are there vampires, though?
There's probably a poster or two in the background for sharp-eyed people. There's probably a Shadowland poster somewhere in the background. And it has thunder and lightning in it. Every film I make has to have thunder and lightning. So, for what that's worth.
And full disclosure, my cousin Ryan Foizey has a cameo in the film. Thankfully, he did not ruin the entire production.
Oh, my God. Ryan for such a relatively small bit part, he's very memorable and he's very, very funny. He's got a bit part as the angry customer. And so the scene he's in is very funny, and then he comes back around again as the angry customer, and it gets a laugh every time. It's like we know the part where Ryan shows up is going to get a laugh out of every audience we've ever seen it with. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun to have him in there.
Well, very cool. Well, yeah. Wyatt Weed, thank you so much for coming on Max on Movies today. Good luck with the 1 week run. I know that I can encourage my listeners to go out there and see the film so you get extended into a 5-year run. Let's just call it right now.
Man, that would be the best. It'd be like Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Exactly.
That'd be awesome.
Okay, Wyatt, thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Max.
That's going to do it for this episode of Max on Movies. Thanks for following me on Twitter at Max on Movies. It's FM News Talk 97.1.
Get more Max on Movies at 971talk.com.